New starry black card volley, the sun was setting over the rolling hills of Tuscany, painting the sky in dramatic shades of deep violet and fiery gold. Nestled amidst the ancient cypress trees sat the Villa Bellissima, an opulent private estate that had been rented at an astronomical cost for what the international press was calling the wedding of the decade. Julian Vance stood on the sweeping marble balcony overlooking the central courtyard, carefully adjusting the silk lapels of his hand-tailored Italian tuxedo. He took a slow, deliberate sip of vintage champagne, letting the cool crispness settle on his tongue. Down below, over 200 high society guests, movie stars, tech billionaires, foreign diplomats, and elite global influencers were mingling around crystal fountains filled with floating orchids and imported roses. 6 months ago, Julian had been just another ambitious, middle-tier executive struggling to secure a permanent foothold in the ruthless world of old money. Today, standing atop this terrace, he felt like the undisputed king of the world. At 34, Julian was strikingly handsome, gifted with a razor-sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, and a silver-tongued charm that could convince a desert trader to buy sand. But his greatest achievement, at least in his own mind, was how smoothly he had executed his transition from his past life to his present glory. 6 months ago, he had finalized his divorce from Clara. Clara had been quiet, reserved, and deeply unassuming. Her family possessed ancient, generational wealth that stretched back centuries, but Clara herself lived with almost baffling modesty. She shunned the spotlight, avoided flashiness, and spent her days quietly managing small charitable trusts, funding art restoration projects, and immersing herself in historical literature. When Julian married her 3 years prior, he believed he had hit the jackpot. But as the years passed, her quiet nature began to irritate his burning ambition. Julian didn't just want access to wealth, he wanted the world to fall to its knees in envy. He wanted flash, excess, headlines, and endless public admiration. Enter Chloe. Chloe was a modern digital sensation, a breathtaking fashion model with millions of devoted followers who lived every single second of her life in front of a smartphone camera lens. She demanded nonstop luxury, breathed exclusivity, and craved the gaze of the world. Julian had fallen head over heels for her, or rather, he fell in love with the glamorous reflection of himself whenever he stood beside her. The divorce from Clara had been shockingly easy, or so Julian thought. Believing Clara to be naive and unassertive, Julian had hired a team of aggressive corporate lawyers to draft a settlement that stripped her of any claim to the lifestyle they had shared. Because Clara's family trust was structured through complex offshore entities, Julian's lawyers treated Vance Enterprises, the primary company Julian had managed during the marriage, as Julian's personal property. Julian had presented Clara with a harsh settlement that left her with nothing more than her family's old brownstone apartment in Boston and a modest liquid stipend. To his delight, Clara hadn't even fought back. She didn't hire high-powered litigators, she didn't raise her voice, and she didn't demand an audit. She simply sat at the conference table, signed the papers with an unreadable expression, packed her modest wardrobe, and vanished from his life. That night, Julian had toasted champagne with his legal team, laughing heartily and calling Clara weak, gullible, and utterly foolish. Now, looking down from the balcony, Julian watched Chloe floating through the courtyard in a custom-designed silk wedding gown adorned with 10,000 hand-stitched South Sea pearls. Her laughter rang out across the garden as she flashed a massive 12-carat canary diamond ring toward a group of eager photographers. "Julian's darling," Chloe called out, waving up at him with a pristine, manicured hand. "Come down here. The wedding coordinator needs to settle the final authorization before the fireworks show begins." Julian smiled, taking a final swallow of champagne, and made his way down the grand, winding stone staircase. As his polished leather shoes hit the courtyard floor, the gathered crowd erupted into polite applause. Julian placed a warm, possessive arm around Chloe's waist pulling her close and kissing her forehead for the cameras. "Is everything to your absolute satisfaction, my love?" Julian asked smoothly. "It is absolute perfection," Chloe beamed, kissing his cheek while keeping her eyes fixed firmly on a camera crew filming their interaction. "Though Monsieur Dupont says the private jet charters for our guests from London and Paris, along with the extra reserve inventory of Chateau Margaux, raised the grand total quite a bit. The wedding planner, an impeccably dressed Frenchman named Monsieur Dupont, stepped forward holding a heavy silver tray. Resting upon it was a state-of-the-art digital payment terminal. "Monsieur Vance," Dupont said with a respectful bow, "the event has been magnificent." The final consolidated invoice, including the private security detail, the floral importations from Holland, the Michelin-starred catering, the estate reservation, and the fine jewelry commissions, comes to exactly $5.2 million. As per our strict binding contract, full payment authorization is required before the evening gala commences. A collective gasp echoed through the surrounding crowd at the staggering figure. Chloe preened with pride, glancing around the courtyard to ensure every influencer and journalist had heard the astronomical number. Julian didn't even blink. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out a sleek, matte black titanium card. It bore no raised numbers and no visible bank logos, only a microchipped metallic strip and a heavy, weighted feel that felt like pure gold in the palm of his hand. It was the Sovereign Black Card, an invitation-only line of global credit reserved strictly for the top fraction of 1% of global wealth holders. "Charge it all to this," Julian said casually, flipping the card onto Dupont's silver tray with a flick of his wrist. "And add a 10% tip for your staff." When you operate at this level, numbers are just decorative. The surrounding crowd murmured in deep admiration. Chloe clapped her hands in delight, wrapping her arms around Julian's neck. Julian smirked, crossing his arms, waiting for the receipt to print so he could sign his name and officially open the dance floor. Dupont inserted the heavy metallic card into the reader. The screen flickered, sending an encrypted satellite signal to the master banking server in Zurich. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Suddenly, a sharp, high-pitched double beep echoed across the courtyard. Dupont frowned slightly, lowering his glasses to examine the small digital display. "Is there a system delay?" Julian asked, his voice carrying a subtle edge of impatience. "Forgive me, Monsieur Vance," Dupont murmured smoothly. "The terminal displays a system code I have not encountered before. Allow me to reswipe." Dupont withdrew the card and inserted it once more. The machine chimed a second time, louder and more insistent. A bright, pulsing red line of text flashed across the screen. "Transaction DENIED. Code 99, fraudulent hold." A sudden, uncomfortable hush fell over the immediate circle of guests. Chloe's radiant smile wavered. "Julian." "What does it say?" "It's nothing, darling," Julian said quickly, though a drop of cold sweat suddenly prickled at the base of his neck. He snatched the card off Dupont's tray. "The local satellite connection in these Tuscan hills is notoriously unreliable. It's a simple machine error." "Sir," Dupont said gently, holding his hands up defensively. "My terminal is connected via a dedicated military-grade satellite uplink." The response came directly from the sovereign issuing authority in Switzerland. "It indicates the card has been locked due to an unauthorized user attempt." "That is absurd," Julian snapped, his voice rising sharply and cutting through the background music of the string quartet. "I have been using this corporate line for 3 years. My company, Vance Enterprises, is backed by this line. Swipe it again immediately, or I will ensure your firm never works another elite event in Europe." "I am afraid he cannot do that, Julian." The voice came from the rear of the courtyard. It was soft, perfectly modulated, yet carried an icy authority that instantly silenced the entire garden. The heavy wrought iron gates of the estate swung wide open. Walking down the stone pathway was a woman dressed in a bespoke, emerald-green trouser suit. Her dark hair was styled into an immaculate, low bun, and her eyes were calm, cool, and sharp as crushed diamonds. It was Clara. Beside her walked two men in dark tailored business suits, carrying sleek leather briefcases. Flanking them were four uniformed officers of the Italian Carabinieri, alongside two senior officials bearing the official badges of European financial crimes investigators. Julian stared at her, his jaw dropping in sheer, unadulterated shock. Clara, what? What are you doing here? How did you even bypass a state security? I purchased the private security firm last Tuesday, Julian, Clara replied casually, stepping past the stunned crowd. Her high heels clicked rhythmically against the Tuscan cobblestones. So technically, every guard on this property works for me. Chloe stepped forward, her face contorting into immediate fury. Who is this woman? Julian, why is your ex-wife crashing our wedding? Security, throw her out. None of the guards moved. In fact, two of the largest security guards stepped directly in front of Julian and Chloe, blocking their exit from the courtyard. Clara, have you completely lost your mind? Julian hissed, stepping toward her, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. You signed the settlement 6 months ago. You signed away your rights. You have no legal standing to crash my wedding and make a scene. Get off this property before I sue you into absolute oblivion. Clara stopped just 2 feet away from him. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at him with an expression of quiet, profound pity, as if looking at a foolish child who had no idea he was standing in the middle of a trap. You always were remarkably short-sighted, Julian, Clara said softly. You spent 3 years focused entirely on the glittering surface of life, never bothering to understand the massive foundation beneath your feet. She reached out her gloved hand and effortlessly slid the matte black titanium card from Julian's paralyzed fingers. You told everyone, your friends, your business partners, and your lovely new bride, that this card was issued to Vance Enterprises. You told the world that you built the empire that funded this endless stream of luxury. It is my empire, Julian yelled, glaring frantically at his guests, many of whom were now pulling out their smartphones to record every second of the unfolding drama. Vance Enterprises was a temporary shell subsidiary, Julian, Clara corrected smoothly, turning the black card over between her fingers. It was created under the sovereign umbrella of my family's private trust. 3 years ago, when we married, my family granted you secondary executive management access, strictly, so you could oversee domestic property maintenance for us. You assumed because your name was printed on the front of a plastic card, the wealth belonged to you. Julian froze. The color drained from his face, so fast he looked as though he might collapse on the spot. What? What are you talking about? When my parents passed away, Clara continued, her calm voice carrying clearly across the dead-silent courtyard. They left their entire fortune inside an irrevocable sovereign trust. I am the sole trustee, the sole beneficiary, and the exclusive owner of every master account. You never owned a single cent of it. Chloe whirled around to face Julian, her eyes wide with terror and escalating rage. Julian, what is she talking about? Tell her she's lying right now. Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind was spinning wildly, tumbling through half-remembered legal documents, corporate filings, and 3 years of blind, arrogant assumptions. During our divorce 6 months ago, Clara said, turning her cool gaze toward Chloe. Julian was so blinded by his eagerness to get rid of me and parade around with you that he didn't even bother to read the full financial schedules attached to the decree. He assumed I was a quiet, uneducated fool who was giving up without a fight. He didn't realize that by signing that settlement, he legally severed his temporary management role, relinquishing every right to access my family's capital. Then why did the card work for the last 6 months? Julian stammered, his voice trembling violently. I spent millions, I bought luxury penthouses, I leased private jets, I bought her ring. The card worked yesterday. A faint, breathtaking smile touched Clara's lips. Because I explicitly authorized the bank to let it work, she whispered. The courtyard became so eerily quiet that the soft rustling of the evening breeze through the olive trees sounded like thunder. If I had revoked your secondary access the day our divorce was finalized, Clara explained, taking a slow step closer, you would have owed a few $100,000 in personal debt. A minor inconvenience. You would have declared bankruptcy, restructured your life, and spent the rest of your days portraying yourself as a victim of my family's legal team. That wasn't nearly enough for me. She paused, gesturing casually toward the breathtaking, multi-million-dollar venue surrounding them. I wanted you to build your own gallows, Julian. I waited patiently for 6 months. I watched you spend millions of my family's fortune on sports cars, designer clothing, high-stakes investments, and finally, this absurdly lavish $5 million wedding. But more importantly, I waited until you personally signed every single vendor contract in your own legal name. I waited until you bound yourself to non-refundable financial obligations across 3 different continents. Julian's knees buckled. He was forced to grab the edge of a nearby dining table to keep himself from collapsing onto the cobblestones. And exactly 45 minutes ago, Clara concluded, turning to the dark-suited official standing beside her, the moment you signed the final vendor execution agreement for tonight's event, I officially notified the sovereign issuing authority. I reported your secondary access as fraudulent, retroactively revoked your management privileges, and presented the bank with the official documentation proving you forged corporate guarantor signatures to raise your credit limits. The senior investigator stepped forward, pulling an official, court-stamped document from his leather briefcase. Julian Vance, the investigator announced in a ringing, authoritative tone. I am Director Miller from the International Financial Crimes Division. Because you knowingly used altered guarantor paperwork to siphon funds from a private sovereign trust, your actions over the past 6 months constitute international grand larceny, wire fraud, and grand corporate theft totaling over $16 million. Chloe let out a horrified, high-pitched shriek. $16 million. She looked at Julian as if he were carrying a contagious plague. Without a moment's hesitation, she yanked the massive 12-carat canary diamond ring off her finger and hurled it violently onto the stone floor at his feet. I had nothing to do with this, Chloe screamed, backing away toward the crowd. I didn't know anything. He told me he was a self-made billionaire. I am a victim here. The ring, the silk dress, the private jet charters, the catering, and this entire estate, Clara said calmly to Chloe, were all secured under fraudulent credit applications. Since the funds have been officially frozen and revoked, every vendor present tonight has already executed immediate civil asset liens against Julian personally. In fact, local Tuscan magistrates have already seized his personal bank accounts to cover tonight's unpaid venue debts. Clara. Please, Julian gasped, his supreme arrogance completely shattered into dust. He fell to his knees on the hard stone floor, reaching out toward her with trembling, sweaty hands, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. Clara, please, we were married for 3 years. You loved me, we can resolve this quietly. I'll pay back every penny, I'll work for your trust, I'll do whatever you ask, please. Don't destroy me like this. Clara stood over him, looking down at his trembling frame. Her face showed no anger, no hatred, no sadness, and no satisfaction. There was only absolute, crystal-clear coldness. You told me on the day you walked out of my apartment that quiet people don't survive in this world, Julian, Clara said, leaning down slightly so her voice vibrated directly in his ear. You told me I was too soft, too invisible to ever leave a mark on the world. But you forgot the most fundamental rule about quiet people. She straightened up, holding her head high as her voice echoed across the courtyard. We listen, we observe. And when we strike, we leave no survivors. Clara gave a single, firm nod to the carabinieri officers. The officers stepped forward instantly. Julian tried to scramble backward, but 2 officers grabbed his arms, pinning him smoothly to the ground. A loud, sharp metallic click echoed through the garden as heavy steel handcuffs locked firmly around his wrists. The crowd of high society guests erupted into complete chaos. Influencers scrambled to stop their live streams, celebrities rushed toward the side exits, and furious vendors began barking orders to lock down the estate gates until local police could document their unpaid losses. Chloe was already screaming hysterically into her phone at her talent manager, hurling curses at Julian as the police hauled him, weeping and trembling, down the cobblestone pathway toward a waiting law enforcement vehicle. Clara walked calmly to the marble balcony railing, picking up the crystal champagne glass Julian had abandoned earlier. She looked out over the sweeping, moonlit valleys of Tuscany, enjoying the absolute stillness of the night. She took a small, elegant sip, placed the glass gently onto the stone railing, and walked away from the ruined estate into the cool night air, leaving the shattered remains of Julian's life behind her forever.